Hello guys, I am Vitold and this is a unique moment of me being able to review a very unique brand, a very common bike, a Husqvarna Norden 901. It's not a very popular model, and yes, I'm saying Husqvarna because that's how it's written. In original it's also said to be Husqvarna. I know some of you Americans are saying Husqvarna, even though there's no A in the way. But anyway, it's not a very popular model in the segment, but then not many ride Husqvarnas and Husqvarnas as well. We rather cut tree branches with them or the trees themselves. Perhaps that's why the brand decided to cut some corners this time by taking an existing bike from its competition, its mother company actually, changing the way it looks, removing some features, making some stuff less refined, bump up the price and offer it under their brand. Well, it's not necessarily cutting corners actually, but perhaps very efficiently doing the job or doing business. I'm not judging their policy, especially that the more choices we have, the better for us. So this used to be a KTM 890 Adventure and it largely remains, which is great as I personally love that motorcycle. So what could have gone wrong here? The engine is the same, the switches are mostly the same, if not exactly the same. There are hazard lights removed for some reason. The funny fuel tank hanging down low is here too, and if you look closely, even that swing arm looks somehow very familiar. I'm guessing that it's from a KTM 890 Adventure somehow. I've had immense amount of fun on that KTM. On this one though, let's see. But it definitely gave me a hard time off the road and I am sore till now. So I'm going to tell you what it's like to ride it, who this bike could suit best, who should absolutely avoid it and why. I definitely need to start in order as once I got close to the bike I had two impressions. First, that it really looks like an old Honda Transalp, and second, that it appears to be quite massive in terms of width in the fuel tank area. But also, as a side effect of that, the seat seems to be unusually low. It's not, but the whole impression suggests that it is. It's actually on the higher side. It's at 85.4 centimeters and can be raised by 2 centimeters to 87.4 centimeters. But the lowest setting turned out to be better for me at 1 meter 83 centimeters tall or 6 feet tall. And in the end, I was unable to flat-foot it on both sides at the same time because of the wide seat. I didn't especially like that, but at least the seat is quite comfortable in terms of softness thanks to all that. In terms of its shape, not so much as it's angled forward, so having me slide in my pants forward and making them stretch around everything down there, it would end up in me crushing my jewels a bit. Not too much as the sloping shape of the front part of the seat that overlaps the fuel tank is not that steep, and in the end the surface of the seat is generally comfortable. It is nicely wide for when you are riding and not supporting yourself with your legs, because then it's challengingly wide when you stop. Well, in the end there are better seats, but somehow you should survive here. But then there's one thing that struck me and I stayed struck till the end, and well, it would be a deal breaker for me personally in this motorcycle, and it's not there in the KTM, which will be good news for people who are looking similarly to me in terms of body type and also who consider KTM. And I'll tell you about it a little bit later so that it doesn't influence your perception of everything else till that moment. Now, this middleweight adventure motorcycle uses the same 889 cubic centimeter inline engine with 2 cylinders from KTM. The power remains at 105 horsepower, and so does the torque with 100 Newton meters. And boy, oh boy, what a fantastic engine it is. I truly love it. It is a performance beast no matter where you are and what you want to do with it. It pulls all the way from the start. The clutch is fairly easy to get used to. Mid-range of RPM, it is a beast there, and at the highest RPM it doesn't slow down. In other words, it is in my opinion a perfect engine in this segment with only just 2 weaknesses. One is not a big deal while the other is a big deal. The little thing is that in the second half of the RPM range, it transfers vibration to the mirrors and they shake so much that you won't see any details in them. Forget about recognizing if it's a Ferrari behind you waiting to race or it's a fire truck on its way to some emergency and indicating for you to move over. Yeah, not a big deal. By the way, mirrors themselves made me happy. They almost, but I believe we cannot go wrong with round or square mirrors as they provide a large field of view, so it's a good point here. Now about that bad thing, big bad thing caused by the engine, that is something that I definitely need to tell you about. It's made me suffer, and there seems to be no hope, unfortunately, and that is heat. I've had exactly the same complaint on the KTM, and it's just unbearable during warmer weather. On no bike ever have I literally had to move my legs away to the sides of the bike to feel any sort of relief from the heat, and I stayed sweaty everywhere, including my underwear, for an hour after riding. It's there not only when you stop at the traffic lights, but also when you ride slow and literally freaking burns. I ride with whole lower legs and knees protectors made of rather thick materials, and yet it wouldn't help much with the heat. So if you'd be using Norden to go far north, it's a big advantage as you won't need the heated seat, which is an option on this bike, as the engine will nicely keep you warm even in Arctic climate. But if you live in a warmer place or even in medium warmth climate, this is hard. To feel comfortable highway only or riding outside of the city all the time, there you should be fine, but urban riding may leave you preferring to take a car. And that's not the point here. If it's not an issue for you, for whatever reason, then you will appreciate what this engine can do. It is lovely. It doesn't need too many gear changes, and only of course if you use one of the higher gears at rather low speeds, because it's still not the biggest engine. It won't be as explosive then, since it's not an electric engine, it's not 1.5 liters, so the torque isn't exactly that super crazy. There's a thing that will make you feel a sudden engagement of the whole powertrain when riding in the first gear and closing it and opening the throttle, so be careful at the roundabouts because it may get a little bit shaky if you're not using a clutch at the same time. So other than those things mentioned, I'm absolutely in love with this engine, so it is a good choice in terms of a donor, Husqvarna. And by the way, this and KTM 890 Adventure have something magical about their throttle feel, as it is unbelievably smooth, and in combination with a fairly quiet engine sound, it's not getting dramatic in terms of the note and the vibe at all at higher RPM. It feels like there is no effort in accelerating for this motorcycle, and it's a fantastic feeling. This here is sort of like in an electric motorcycle. It actually makes me feel like I can do anything I want with this engine and it will never complain. It will just get hotter and hotter, of course. In terms of handling, which is super important here, and quite a few motorcycles in this segment do it pretty well, this one does too. It's very, very composed when it comes to changing directions, and everything seems to be under control regardless of speeds. It is super reliable here. At low speeds, if you focus, the bike allows you to crawl exactly where you want to between the cars or wherever else. At high speeds, it's still easy to control. It does lean nicely, it doesn't fight, it doesn't try to straighten up, and it gives a fair amount of confidence. It would be better here and there, but I feel that these 50% on-road and off-road tires are to blame here, as there will be one more thing to mention about them that would make me hesitate a little bit about the whole bike. Maybe or maybe not, as there will be one more thing to mention about something that might be related, but that's for later. So the bike really seems to have no weak spots when it comes to handling, and the only one small thing is that when you brake with the front brake, it tends to react by straightening up slightly. It's especially visible with rapid use of the front brake, but it's nothing crazy, and there's nothing like that when accelerating or using the rear brake. It is a fairly small thing, but I noticed it there. Riding over bumps when in a lean leaves the Norden with a gentle waving motion up and down, just like in a KTM. Nothing nervous, and just steady up and down motion like in a big limousine with air suspension. What I do not necessarily like is that choice of tires that wouldn't give as much grip as I believe is necessary when dealing with a KTM's engine. So first of all, they would slip here and there when exiting corners, which let's say might sometimes happen regardless of tires. It depends on conditions also. Here it would happen without that much throttle, without that much lean, or simply at lower speeds or speeds low enough for me to pay attention to it. This also made me hesitate during faster riding, as I would stay unsure of how much I can let myself go before the tires would give up. I wouldn't feel exactly that confident on it, and that impacts my perception of handling. I had it in my mind and I would much rather not. But then I rode another bike with the same set of tires, Aprilia Tuareg, and there I haven't noticed that much of lack of confidence. The lack of grip was still there while I was pushing the bike much more, so my guess is that it's not only the tires here. Anyway, then a very strange thing kept happening over and over again that would make me not enjoy my time on Norden that much, and in fact I decided to give it back quicker than I intended. I couldn't use the bike's performance. That sounds weird, right? In the first gear, trying to complete a full acceleration from a standstill, not even once was I able to do it. The bike would repeatedly choke somewhere on the way and limit its power. I experienced something similar in a Triumph Tiger 900 in a GT version, and that was, I believe, in one of the modes, but nothing like that in the mother of this Norden, so KTM 890 Adventure. Here it's either some software glitch or that bloody tire. If you cannot fully use the bike and just expect it to sort of malfunction every single time, then it takes a lot of fun away from having such a great engine in it. What's the point? The tires on the bike are Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR. They're also mounted on an Aprilia Tuareg, where yeah, they lack some grip, but they do not take away the confidence, which leads me to a conclusion that the lack of confidence on the Norden is not exactly caused by them, or at least not only. So well, there you have it. What about the suspension and so at the same time the comfort of riding? This turns out not to be an off-road motorcycle, but more of a touring bike, so an adventure, not an enduro. Comfort matters, in other words, and I've told you about the seat, I've told you about the handlebar that seems fine to me. It's not too wide, it's not too narrow, but perhaps one could say that it should be further forward for someone of my size to be a little bit more comfortable. Then someone else would tell you that their wrists somehow start hurting, and they would be right, because of that bloody angled seat. On one hand, when accelerating or riding steadily at higher speeds, being sort of lifted by the wind stream, I would wish that the bars were a little bit further away so I could actually lean and counter that. But then when riding slower or when braking, I actually felt like having the bars closer would be more comfortable, and I wouldn't have to place as much pressure on my wrists. So see, it kind of depends. Just a strange seat and so much confusion there. Getting back to the suspension, which is manually adjustable in the front and in the rear. In the beginning, I was like, oh, it's hard, likely because Husqvarna went and followed the path of others who believe that an off-road motorcycle with a lot of suspension travel needs to make up for that with stiffness. But then riding over a variety of things, including a very uneven road and some little off-road trail, I noticed how composed it becomes and how well it deals with all that rough stuff. So in the end, riding over single potholes or bumps, you will feel them clearly, maybe even too clearly, and Norden may seem jumpy, but riding over a lot of rough stuff, bike smoothens it out very well, actually surprisingly well. And to me, I wish it was always as comfy as on those bumpy roads. There are more comfortable motorcycles in terms of suspension in the category, but there are also ones that are more harsh. I think this one's a little bit softer, a little bit more comfy general than the KTM. Having 22 centimeters of front suspension travel and 21.5 in the rear, along with crazy 25.2 centimeters of ground clearance, there's a hell of a lot to work with. A weak spot of Norden is its wind protection that's below the standard. as it generates turbulences. And it's only possible to handle for me up to around 120 kilometers per hour. Above that, the stream of wind is too strong and the ride just becomes a struggle. There is a taller windshield for this bike for a fairly good price, so I would be very interested in trying that out. Turbulences are, well, they are not welcome regardless of the height though, and you cannot adjust the height of the windshield, so not a good job done here. But then look at those details, some of them being sneaky. Oh, sneaky, you'll see what I mean. I really like the paint job that doesn't stop where the seat is, but instead Husqvarna have continued the pattern over the seat, and the fuel cap that looks different, and this LED front light with a ring around it, that's nice. It's not cornering, however. I also really like the texture of the paint. It's very nice and gives that upscale feel. And take a look at those passenger handles. Very unusual design with leaving them open, attached only on one side. It really works great when you jump off of the bike and your trousers get caught by one of those elements working just like a hook. So, oh yes, smashing one's face into the ground along with the bike works like a good right hook. So yeah, that's the part that I called sneaky. It actually did catch my trousers once. I saved it, but imagine my surprise. Not always doing things differently means that the effect and the response will be positive, as this proves. Same with removing hazard lights for some reason, but instead keeping the light icon that you don't know which one is on, is it left or right. This is quite stupid, especially that the switches and the whole display are just like in a KTM, and they are great with those animations and explanations of certain functions. It's all clear and easy to use in that menu. So what the hell? Now, if there were some more useful modes than just street and rain and off-road, I would like to have a separate button to switch between them, but since street is all that's going to be used, I wouldn't bother myself with that. This particular bike had modified software that included a mode from Norden 901 Expedition, which is a sort of a, let's call it rally/adventure or taller version of this. And then you can set ABS and traction control intervention on the fly just using those up and down buttons on the left handlebar. This could be the solution to the problem with the first gear acceleration in some spots. If you're planning on doing that, then you can make the traction control more quickly liberal and you wouldn't still have to switch it completely off and risk getting yourself in bigger trouble. So yeah, interesting. But the regular Norden 901 usually doesn't have it. ABS can be switched off and it is cornering. There's also chain drive as expected in this segment, and if you want to go off-road, well, think twice. I understand the desire, and I see some of you guys suggesting me to try and see how they do off the road. They all do badly. They are too heavy, they are too delicate, too expensive, and with street or mostly street tires. Being tall and heavy is the worst thing that can happen out there. And I took Norden for a softcore trail and some bumps, and it's pretty comfortable to ride on such surface when sitting. And for example, Yamaha Tenere 700 would kill me if I would try doing that when sitting, as I did try that. That's the previous bike that I tested. And then here and also there, I got back with muscle soreness in my legs. I almost crashed there because of the shitty transmission, and I did hate it there. So check it out if you want to see me suffer. Anyhow, Norden is comfortable, as again, if the road is fully bumpy, it somehow does great. It smoothens that out. But try to stand on the pegs, and in a second, you'll know that Husqvarna also knows that this is not an enduro motorcycle. The foot pegs are high, the handlebar is low, so you look like a paralyzed 90-year-old that slouches to reach too short of a support stick. If you want to ride handling the bars, which I suggest, you've got to bend your legs a lot, or bend your backs, which won't work. Hence the muscle soreness in my legs. The low speed control of the bike is a plus here. So if you have to ride it over something like this, then this is a solid bike to do that, but as long as you can sit, not stand. Engine guard does the job as well, as I could hear stones hitting it instead of hitting the engine block and damaging some other things like exhaust pipes. This fuel tank sort of protection proved itself in battle, as someone before me crashed this bike and it survived. The capacity of this still interesting tank is 19 liters, while the whole motorcycle weighs around 220 kilograms with all fluids. With a fairly low center of gravity because of that fuel tank, it feels quite fine to handle when riding. Still, it itself isn't that short. Also, the seat is not super crazy, amazingly low, so stay focused when moving it around or stopping over some ruts. There wasn't much room for error before going down. The rims on this bike are 21 inches in the front and 18 inches in the rear, and I'm glad that the large front wheel doesn't negatively impact Norden's turning performance, especially at higher speeds. It does need a moment to change directions, but it remains flickable enough for a tall bike. Brakes. And here I feel that they are strong enough, that they are easy to dose, and the rear brake can do something before ABS cuts its balls, so it's above the segment standard. But there was something wrong with the front brake, as when gently slowing down and being close to stopping, it would sort of engage more and then less, as if one of the discs had something on it or it was bent and would be causing that periodic growth of intensity of braking. It was like tick, 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 something like that. There was something going on, but I'm not sure exactly, especially that this bike went down on the ground before, which the signs of you can see on its right side again. Nothing like that would happen in the KTM, so let's assume that this is only this specific example having something wrong in it. And in fact, well, there was something wrong with the bike when it comes to transmission as well. Norden 901 has a quick shifter which works nicely and smoothly, and also the gear lever is quite easy to move up and down with a nice but delicate click. Now, going up and down through the gears, it would repeatedly not engage the third gear when switching up from the second. I don't know what was up with it. It would go into neutral instead to the third and then jump back to the second, and then if I would push it again, the third gear would successfully engage, but only then in most cases. Other than this thing, likely related to this particular bike, or maybe not, it's an enjoyable to use transmission. And alright, so what's that one thing that would not let me properly enjoy this bike aside from heat, first gear traction control issues, and this weird quick shifter scared of the third gear? Well, it's the foot pegs. Right after setting off, it would be obvious that for a person like me, who is not super crazy tall, sitting on Norden with the seat in its lowest position, that's still a bit too high for me somehow in terms of reaching the ground, sitting on it is hard to manage for more than 3 seconds. Foot pegs are so bloody high in relation to the seat that I felt like squatting on it or like sitting on my feet. The one thing that I couldn't and still cannot process is why I hadn't felt that way on a KTM. And I don't know if there are differences between the two in this area, but here it's so bad for me that I would have to just skip it just because of this one thing. It's a pity for me in an adventure motorcycle, but if you are coming off of a sports bike or are a shorty and plan on lowering the bike while keeping the seat as it is, then for these short-legged folks it may feel like at home. But still, you've got to lower the bike because you won't reach the ground. For me, in this setup, it is an issue. In terms of equipment, aside from what I mentioned, there is a cruise control, there's a 12-volt socket, there can be heated grips and both heated seats, there are handguards, there is center stand, there are lots of other accessories that some of are really fun, like headlamp and those side lamps, protectors, and so on. The design is, I would say, questionable, maybe even controversial, but it's different. I'd say it's Moto Guzzi V85TT style, but better, as you see that it's modern thanks to that LED ring light. There's a modern paint texture, and the style of side graphics is also pretty cool. I cannot say that I'm a fan of the 10-year-old Transalp design, but you guys tell me if you like it or not. Or if you prefer the looks over the KTM 890 Adventures design. So I believe that this is a bike for tall people with numb legs that won't be bothered by the squatting position, that will enjoy the amazing performance and mostly take the bike outside of the city, as inside the cooling fans just don't do the job well enough and you're frying yourself slowly from the bottom up. Ride quality is acceptable with the bike jumping over single bumps and then nicely flying over surfaces fully covered in bumps and potholes. Definitely get yourself a taller windshield and you'll have a pretty rare and unique looking motorcycle. When I get it over a KTM 890 Adventure, there should be my head-to-head comparison of these two coming in some time, so subscribe and stay tuned for that. On Vito's recommendation board, I'm giving this bike a 6.5 out of 10 as my legs are too long and I guess too sensitive perhaps to sit, and also at the same time too long to stand on it, and also too short to support myself on the ground. And then whether it's the tires or the weird position on the bike, I would never be able to feel entirely confident on this bike. And on the KTM I definitely did, even though I find its suspension less comfortable. So you got a little spoiler from me here in terms of which bike I would choose myself. Well, in terms of comfort, check these beauties. 7G11 electric office chair, that's what I'm sitting on. You see one in the back, the black one. You can check them out on the website called powerseats.eu. I'm involved with a brand. And that's it from me, and see you in the next honest reviews and comparisons.